50%.
50%.
50%. Did you know that if you're between the ages of 18 and 35, you're 10 times more likely to die from a car crash?
Increase your odds by 50%.
Just by wearing a seatbelt.
It can make the difference between living or dying.
I know this.
We know this.
Do you?
So click it or ticket. In Rhode Island, it's the law. Seatbelts save lives.
Wait. You. What else? I mean, you chair. Man, to was here. You. I know, boy. Anyway, Tonga the rhyme with corner. Will you come with me to my corner? I won't give you hard drive format. May was Senebel 5 on that. Nice chick, may I chroma. Maybe do nice flick with my Kodak. Freeze, baby cheese. Oh gosh, she body, maybe boom to say kunka. By the way, a froze simple, vital. Cause I did kai say me shower revival. But na many more me and I'm team and try that. And then, say my chill, I will vibe.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Africa Teaching, a production of the Pepperbird magazine. I'm Karen McLaurin Chesson, your host. Today we have an exciting guest. Her name is Bernadette Paolo. She's president and CEO of the Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa. And I'm delighted to have Bernadette here. And we'll be talking about the work of the Africa Society in this segment. So without further delay, thank you so much, Bernadette, for joining us. Typically, we know you're in the D.C. and around the world, but here you are in Little Rhodey, Providence, and we're delighted to have you. And could you just kindly tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, and not so much what you do yet, but just who Bernadette Paolo is?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you. It's really such a pleasure to see you again. We were classmates in law school, and I want to commend you for this television program and for Pepperbird magazine, you and your husband. You're doing a good service.
Oh, thank you, Bernadette.
Well, as you know, I'm an attorney by profession, yes. And I have a master's degree in communications education. I've been working in the Africanist milieu for about 25 years.
Wow.
I started on Capitol Hill, and then while there, I was on the Committee on Foreign Affairs for 10 years. And my tenure there culminated in being the staff director for Africa for the Congress.
Wow. Wow, that must have been exciting, huh?
Very exciting.
And now you're president and CEO of the Africa Society.
Yes.
Could you share with us what's the mission of the Africa Society? What is it? And then what's its mission?
Well, let me tell you, I will give you just a brief history, and I'll tell you about our mission. From 1996 to 2000, when President Clinton was in office, there was a White House conference on Africa. Oh. And it was determined there that Americans needed to know more about the continent of Africa, that there had to be a constituency that was more broad-based, that there had to be more extant linkages through all the sectors, and that there had to be a policy plan of action for Africa. I ended up being the director of field operations for that effort. Oh. And it turned out to be at the end, they had regional summits culminating in a grand summit in Washington, D.C. in 2000. And in that process, there were 25,000 people engaged.
Wow.
And when President Clinton appeared at the National Summit on Africa in Washington, and he saw that there was even a delegation from Utah. He said he didn't even know that there were any Africans in Utah. And though there may have been few, the point was made then to everyone, to politicians, to policymakers, to academics, that there was this thirst for knowledge about the continent of Africa. During the course of the policy formulation of the National Summit on Africa, one of the top recommendations is that Americans at all levels learn more about the continent. So the Africa Society was born as a result of that. And what happened was we started putting together programs for all ages, all walks of life on Africa. We have this program. So our mission then, back to the mission, is the mission of the Africa Society then is to educate Americans throughout this country about the countries, cultures, histories, economies, and contributions of Africans to this country and to the world.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
which are sizable.
Yes, yes, indeed. How would you describe the services that the Africa Society provides, and the impact that the society has had in Africa?
Well, you know, when we started this work, I've been staff director in getting money for Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, lobbying or advancing, we say advocacy now, not lobbying, but getting people to be interested in Africa outside of the Congressional Black Caucus and a small number of people was very difficult. Then the summit, and now when you come to Washington, virtually every think tank has an Africa program, lectures on Africa. So Africa has advanced from near the bottom of the foreign policy agenda to nearly the top. And that is very important. I'd like to think that the summit and the Africanist community that had been in place for a long time had something to do with it. Our specific programs are, we have a program called Teach Africa. That's why I like the name of your program, Africa Teach In. Teach Africa, we've done in concert with UCLA, Georgetown University, and basically we begin by engaging principals and superintendents to show them that teaching about the countries comprising the continent is more than just social studies. So we marry them with, you know, people in the performing arts, people in the media, politicians, and we show them that this Africa space is very exciting. People in healthcare, sciences, technology. And once we do that, then that sets the stage for the training of teachers. And we've trained teachers together with the Southern Center for International Studies out of Atlanta. And to date, we've reached, and then we have a forum. The first one was in 2004 at the Department of State. It was one of the largest gathering of students, 1,200.
Wow. Now these are high school students?
High school students. High school students. And it's a one-day Africa immersion program. That's one of our programs. We've also, I'm proud to say, people say, well, what does that mean for Africans who live on the continent? We've been concerned about changing the negative image of Africa in the media. And you know those pictures, starving children, chaos, animals. And so we went, my former president Leonard Robinson and I went to the Travel Channel many years ago. And it ended up that we agreed to do a program as a partner of the Travel Channel with 4 African heads of state. And they led the tour called the Presidential Tours of Africa.
Wow.
And over 600 million viewers worldwide saw it.
Wow. And so what locations were
we went first in 2003 to Uganda with President Museveni, and then we went to Ghana with President Kufuor, and then we went to Botswana with President Mohai, and then we went to Senegal with President Wade. And we had, you know, Forrest Sawyer, who was a leading journalist, Tiki Barber, and others. accompany the president to different places within that country with the president actually leading the tour.
Okay.
But what was markedly different, Karen, is that there were images of people on cell phones, high-rise buildings, manufacturing, students going to school, families going to churches and to mosques. We wanted people to see an Africa that they didn't know.
Right.
You know, and that, I think that was a very important thing. We have lecture series. We have a lecture series called the Andrew Young Lecture Series. We partner with universities. But I think a very important part of our charge is working within coalitions.
Okay.
To get legislation passed. I'm dating myself, but many years ago with Rosa Whitaker, who was the mother of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, we worked on the first free trade agreement for Africa.
Wow.
It was passed in 2000 by President Clinton. 2 successive iterations were passed by President George W. Bush. Okay. It's up for renewal again in 2015.
Now, wait a minute. Why renewal?
Well, because it was, it's difficult when you're questioned by a lawyer because they ask you a trick question. Well, because it was only intended originally to build a foundation for free trade as a sort of a growth mechanism for imports and exports, but American jobs have been provided as well. Okay. And it's helped across the board. And so now we want to renew it, and we're calling upon the Congress to do that. I also joined my colleagues in the formation of watch committees, such as Liberia Watch, prior to President Johnson Sirleaf's taking office, or Mali Watch, and what we do is we convene in times of crises to formulate a plan with our government and with the government that is being impacted. Yes. And really try to come together to generate movements.
Okay. So then I guess at this point I'd be foolish not to ask you, did this group come together for the Ebola epidemic?
This group, we each did, there were groups that were convened on Ebola, but I'm proud to say that all of us in the Africanist community engaged on Ebola. We all, we prodded our government, and fortunately, we didn't have to work very hard at it because President Obama, to his credit, was, the first out of the box. And some people might have said it was a little late, but he and our government, I think the figure is, to date, around $1.4 billion was committed to the United States on the Ebola virus. And our government...
What form did it take?
Well, you can read now about all of the sorts of complexes that were set up by the government to address it. Our military was there. There were lots of doctors and lawyers and professionals, healthcare professionals, who went to Liberia from the United States, outside of the government. So I think that, and I think that they did a very good thing in this instance because they let the government of Liberia take the lead and worked in concert with the international community, the donor community. So there was cohesion among donors, which was very important. And then President Obama also went to the international community and really rallied the international community to get on board with Ebola. Yes. And I think that one of the other things that I was so proud of him about was that he did not allow this contagion about Ebola to stop people. People were saying Ebola in West Africa, Ebola in Africa. And it was impacting Africans residing in the United States and children going to school. And by his example of holding press conferences and being very strong in the face of it, I think that he really did a great service both in the United States and in those 3 countries that were impacted.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Do you educate college students?
No, we invite them to our lecture series, and we would like to do more with college students. We had a program for 11 years with Howard University called the Issue Brief Forum, where we addressed issues that were impacting African governments. And we hope I'm working with Howard now on formulating some plans for what we do in the future in that regard.
Okay. I was just wondering, there are a lot of international affairs programs.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, maybe that would be another resource. You hire people.
Oh yes, I hire mostly Africans because I don't think that you can have an Africa Society unless you have the viewpoints of Africans in it, and we have a distinguished board of directors. And another program I think that's really made a difference in terms of Africa is we're doing a program with the Library of Congress. It's in its third series. It began with Chinua Achebe, the famous author from Nigeria, while he was still with us.
Yes.
And what we did is we're showcasing African authors and poets, and their presentations are being webcast.
Wow.
And so they're going to millions of people because we're again focusing on the talent and the rich repository of information and literature that Africans have contributed and are contributing.
Well, that's another thing when you talk about the arts and literature. I'm thinking about filmmaking.
Yes.
And a film festival. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I'm sure you are aware of the fact that Nigeria and Liberia and Ghana have a wealth of programming, and it goes from historical accounts of life in the village to New York City or Washington, D.C., life, in those cities.
Yes. We hosted at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts a film called Black November about the oil in the Niger Delta.
Okay.
And then that film, we also did a premiere at the United Nations with a very talented filmmaker named Jetta Amata.
Okay.
I think that, Nollywood and in Kenya and throughout Africa, there's just these industries that are just waiting while Nollywood's already there.
Yes. Yes.
But, I think that more and more, I think Americans have to be exposed to films. Yes. And what they're doing now, for example, the film I referenced, they had, Kim Basinger in the film and Mickey Rourke in the film. Okay. So as to really give Americans some idea, some sense of being connected. Yes. But I think in the future we're going to see the ascendancy of African films and African film stars. Yes. I'm hoping.
Yes, I'm hoping too.
Yes.
Well, folks, we're going to take a break and we'll be back in a few moments. So stay tuned.
50%.
50%.
50%. Did you know that if you're between the ages of 18 and 35, you're 10 times more likely to die from a car crash?
Increase your odds by 50%.
Just by wearing a seatbelt.
It can make the difference between living or dying.
I know this.
We know this.
Do you?
So click it, red ticket. In Rhode Island, it's the law. Seatbelts save lives.
Wait.
What else?
was here. Yo. I know, boy. Anyway, Tonga the rhyme with corner. Will you come with me to my corner? I won't give you hard drive format. May was Senebe 5 on that. Nice chick, may a chroma. Maybe do nice flick with my Kodak. Freeze, baby cheese. Oh gosh, she body, maybe boom to sekunka. By the way, fro simple, vital. Cause I dey say me share or revival. But na many more me and I'm team and try that. And then, say my chill, I will vibe. Swine, you make us about 6 hours. Na me real, ma me crash.
Hello, welcome back to Africa Teaching. I just want to recap what we talked about for those of you who are just turning us on. We have with us Bernadette Paolo, who is President and CEO of the Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa. And she told us a little information about herself. She has a JD and Master's in Communication and Education. And she also shared with us the mission and work of the Africa Society. And we were talking about the services that the Africa Society does to promote the interests of the continent of Africa. And now we're going to get back to Bernadette. We have several questions we're excited about asking her, and what impact, and this is deep because, you know, some people may be a little intimidated, but I know you won't.
No.
What impact has the Africa Society had on Africa thus far?
You know, it's a question that keeps me awake at night, actually, you know, because it's hard to assess. I think we've had an impact in that we've been a catalyst for a lot of change. We were at the forefront, you know, fighting for the African Growth and Opportunity Act that is now a reality when there were no countries, and now there are over 40 countries and over 4,000 products and everything. And we fought for debt relief, you know, even pre-Bono, and for HIV/AIDS legislation. I would like to think that something that we've done, something that I've done with the 25 years of my life working for Africa has impacted lots of people. And I get impatient with little things. I want big change all at once. You know, the young people we've reached around the country in the day that we brought them in touch with people like the Secretary of State, for example, and other people, perhaps they can use their talents in a number of sectors now that they know that there are commonalities with their peers in health and science, technology, art, a whole range of things, that maybe they can be good global citizens.
Yes.
That maybe the next time someone sees someone from an African country, they won't ask questions, inane questions like little children have asked of us, like, do you live in trees?
Yes.
I mean, that we can promote, that we can continue to fight battles and point out that the fastest growth, 6 out of 10 of the fastest growing economies are on the continent of Africa. I'm not saying that we don't want to provide balanced information.
Right.
Africa has some issues that African leaders are going to have to contend with. But I've always been focused on the promise and potential. And it is my hope that, you know, sometimes when I get frustrated because change isn't happening fast enough, what I do is write. So I've been publishing information like how the United States national security interest happens to be directly tied to Africa's economic growth. Because when there's poverty, when there's the burgeoning youth population, when women and girls aren't valued, and when there's hunger, I mean, certainly that's a climate for terrorism, that's a climate for conflict. And so I think that
Well,
behooves all of us.
Well, now, I just have to rewind a little bit. Boko Haram.
Yes.
Now, that has truly impacted women in Nigeria in ways that, are just inhumane. And I'd like to know, has the Africa Society, what the Africa Society has done in reference to that.
I've spoken on Boko Haram. I think that, look, well, first of all, Nigeria is a great country. Africa's
really
most populous
beautiful
country. The linchpin for West Africa. As you know, Liberia knew whenever there was a problem with Mali, the Nigerians went out there. And then we saw this army that was seemingly impaled by Boko Haram as it continued to grow. And Boko Haram, I think, was determined to ruin these elections. The good news in all of that is that the elections that took place 2 weeks ago were democratic. The Nigerian people once again showed their resolve. It's a great story.
Yes.
But let's just look at this. It's a very important story. Then we had the horrific tragedy in Kenya with Al-Shabaab killing university students. And we had the problem in Egypt with ISIS. Where they're just it was in Libya actually, where they killed Egyptian workers, and then we have Boko Haram, and then in Mali we had the situation. I went to the election, the first election for the presidency, and when President Keita, who's elected from Mali, was elected on the heels of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb being there and threatening to take over Mali. So these forces are at play in the continent. African leaders really have their plates full, and we see President Buhari assuming office. We see President Johnson Sirleaf, who, the first woman leader in Africa, and, there had been civil war for so long, and now at least there's peace in Monrovia. But these are all fragile conditions if people don't have hope.
Yes.
If they don't have food.
Right.
If they don't have the promise of a job.
Right.
There are still too many countries in Africa where the wage is less than $1 or $1.50 a day. There are still many girls that will be unable to get education. But I am an Afro-optimist. The continent that I knew 25 years ago is not the continent that I see now.
Yes.
And it's markedly better.
Thank goodness.
Yes.
Thank goodness. So, now you're making me want to transition into your views on U.S. policy toward Africa and how it has changed over the years.
I'm going to work backwards.
Okay.
In 2014, last summer, President Obama convened the first African summit in the United States for African heads of state and government.
Excellent.
Over 50 of them came.
Excellent.
Now, it was a different approach. I mean, certainly, part of U.S. policy, as it should be, is to promote democracy and good governance. And with all the many elections coming up in Africa in 2015 and 2016,
yes,
that is definitely a pillar of our foreign policy. It has to be. But what happened at the summit was that they focused on trade. And they focused, and President Obama brought all of the top businesses to the table. And
The top businesses.
U.S. businesses.
Okay, in the U.S.
Yeah, so as a result of that, if things come to fruition and the security situations don't prove to be impediments,
Okay.
there are pledges of $33 billion with businesses, top businesses. Of course, we'll have Chevron and GE and lots of others making these. There's Power Africa, a trade initiative. An initiative that President Obama put out there for making sure that African countries have power, working not only with those governments but with the private sector.
Yeah. Now here's the other piece. Okay, working not only with those governments, but the private sector in Africa, or the private sector in...
That's the exciting thing.
Good.
They're getting African, then there are lots of African millionaires.
Yes.
So they're getting Africans to step up, and they are, because as you know, electricity is a big issue in Africa. And so it's a combination of the private sector from the U.S. side and the African side working with government to make sure that these countries have electricity.
Excellent.
And I think that it's very important. And then they have Trade Africa also. So as I was indicating to you, the thrust of the summit was on trade. And how does that relate to U.S. policy? Since I've been in the Africa space, I've seen a difference, a shift in how our policymakers interact with African leaders. And it's more of a partnership paradigm.
Good.
And not one that reeks of paternalism. And I also, think that, as I indicated, we have the democracy pillar, and then we have trade and investment. And then the United States also is concerned about security and being a good partner in addressing terrorism. And it's not just with Africa, it's just globally. And I think that we're united on that front.
Excellent.
And I think that very important for African governments also is to, and during this time, is to have a religious tolerance and to have a better understanding of one another. And I don't think that we can allow some people who try to hijack a religion and do everything in contravention of a religion to try to color our perceptions.
Yes.
And so I think that, U.S. policy is strong as it pertains to African nations. I hope that it continues that way. And here's the good thing, Karen, and the exciting thing. It's been bipartisan.
Oh, that's unusual.
It started, President Clinton, during President Clinton, it was the Renaissance for Africa with the African Growth and Opportunity Act, debt relief, HIV/AIDS legislation.
Yes.
President Bush comes, he did the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which was a new way of getting development assistance to African and other poor nations contingent on economic factors and good governance. But basically they would decide how those monies would be spent after they passed the accountability tests.
Yes.
And so he did that. He did, President Bush did the PEPFAR, President's Emergency Relief Fund for Africa, for AIDS relief, President's Emergency Fund for AIDS relief. And then now comes President Obama, and he's keeping what those other presidents did alive and not dismantling those, and adding his own imprimatur with respect to Africa. So no matter who the president is in the future, I think that we have a solid foundation from which to build in Africa policy.
Excellent. So now, with regards to your mission to educate Americans about Africa.
Yes.
and the situations facing Africans today, how would you describe the contributions of the Africa Society toward achieving its mission?
You know, running a nonprofit isn't easy. You know, you have funding challenges at times.
Yes.
But all of us, because of our collective determination, and because many members of our staff come from African countries, the commitment is very strong. So there's not a day that goes by where we don't have some objective that we seek to attain on how we're going to do something.
Okay.
So when we don't have an actual program, then we make sure that we're writing or we're forwarding information or we're contemplating how we're going to advance legislation or work with our colleagues. Because, you know, we're only one organization, but together we're very strong.
Yes.
Yes.
Because you're preaching that various countries within the continent of Africa work together.
That's right. And even with respect to, on that note, and we find, you know, regional integration with respect to trade. We're encouraging countries to work together. The African Union now at the helm is bringing countries together, and countries increasingly have to be joined to fight threats being leveled against them. So we in the United States and the Africa space, I think that, you know, historically we've come together to work on issues that we think we can lend our voices to that will resonate with policymakers and in turn result in positive developments for Africans.
Wow. You know, I feel, I can, not because we were classmates, and not because I love this work that you're doing, but you seem very passionate about it, Bernadette.
Well, as I say, you know, I went to Kenya in 1985 for the UN Decade for Women when I was a new staffer on Capitol Hill. And I fell in love with Kenya, and I saw how strong women were, and I saw a parliament in action, and I realized that everything I ever knew about Africa was wrong, and that I never learned about all the other stuff, and I immediately changed my career focus. So I say, I have a love affair with Africa that never ended. Some others have ended, but my love affair with the continent of Africa has never ended.
That's so nice.
Yes.
That's nice. And you know, we wish you all the success in the world with the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Now you're a nonprofit, right?
Yes.
So if people see this interview and want to touch base with you, want to offer a donation, or want to get more information on the Africa Society, or want to help in some initiatives, how do they reach you?
Well, our website is www.africasummit.org, and our work number is 202-232-3862. And we certainly welcome all contributions, but I also want to give a message to all of you in this audience who are thinking about starting a nonprofit, or you have this idea about how you want to change the world but don't think you can. You can, you know. There's something that you can do, and it only takes a firm resolve and amassing as much information as possible and getting some individuals with you who share the same vision, because together we have to be better ambassadors for our country in the future, and we also have to be good global citizens. So I encourage all of you in this audience today who are listening to this message to really use your energy to fight for good.
Wow. Wow. Well, folks, it's time to wrap it up. I hope and trust that you have more information about the Africa Society, which is located in Washington, D.C. They're doing outstanding advocacy work along with promoting and educating the initiatives and the many contributions that Africans have made across the world. And with that, I want to thank you for spending this time with us, and have a great day. Thanks for watching.
I know, boy. Anyway, Tonga the rhyme with corner. Will you come with me to my corner? I won't give you hard drive format. May was Senebe 5 on that. Nice chick, may a chroma. Maybe do nice flick with my Kodak. Freeze, baby cheese. Oh gosh, she body, maybe